So we weren't going to give up there and say there's no lines to be drawn. We wanted to understand what trends could we get. And in fact, we could see that there were clear trends that people have seen in other types of catalysis, such as mock catalysis, which is that increasing the ligand field strength makes oxo formation more favorable, transfer unfavorable. And we can zoom in on one single coordinating atom species. These are all the catalysts for oxygen coordinating. And we can see that some line structures emerge. And I would like to say that just going to larger data sets allows us to define chemical intuition, and I defined my own because I would have told you, oh, the most important thing we can do is stress or compress that metal ligand bond that's just like strained and metal surfaces. But in fact, that's not what is different. The metal ligand bond length just serves to modulate the ligand field strength, and instead the ligand plane diagonal, how much that metal is out of the thing that allows us to scaling relations. It really allows us to win at one step rather than and so, although I still think these lines are a lot more scattered than you typically see in hardware houses, we're going to write down these 3 lines and see how possibility to create a distortion that can then lead to a greater energetics. And I show this because it's not always common knowledge how easy it is to break scaling relations in open shell chemistry, and a lot of times people are simulating things with shells. So here is extension not just to iron 2 replacement, but to multiple metals and oxidation states and different states. And you can see here the error bars here are the standard error fit linear free energy relationship just on the individual metals. Tan line there is the literature value typically recorded for the hack versus trade-off. The global is what it is over set, and you can see that the global free energy relationship just doesn't apply in comparison to the individualized scaling relations. So even if we wanted to use a scaling relation, we have to use the metal and station state to have a matter. So this was work done by Uschi Graham, who recently graduated and will be starting at UCLA in chemical engineering in a couple of years. It's we'll be talking when cells are extended to endographitic single atom catalysts, it's very easy to disrupt scalar relations for these types of systems, as long as you have the metacenter with organic environment. And you might be wondering, this is really, I mean, the only part of the slide of the idea. I'm not going to be talking about the accuracy today. You might be wondering, though, are our conclusions just being artifact or functional? And Vaishnavi in my group very nicely showed in this recent work that it's not that they actually move around, because scaling relations actually don't move around. But the fact that the scaling relations don't move around is consistent regardless of so we very clearly figured out early on that hypercode screening can get us most of the way to uncover new design principles, but we needed something more, and so we needed to wade our toes into the machine learning pool, and we were interested in particular in this regime of having relatively little data, but also wanting to be able to predict properties of transition elements. And so we developed something that was very important. We used with kernel differential models, we used the neural nets, but it's fundamentally a graph-based descriptor, so it has many of the benefits to see out of things in the graph. So these are revised form correlations for products and differences on the molecular graph. They bring no geometric information. And the 5 heuristic properties we most frequently use are either more electronic in nature, they're the nuclear charge, electronegativity of the atoms, stable, or they're more geometric in nature, such as covalent to polymers. And the key takeaway is that they achieved being able to predict DFT level accuracy to within 1 kilocalculable on a subset of feature selected graph descriptors. And we can do this with much higher accuracy than whole molecule representations of the simple arrangements. But I'm only telling you about that so you know when I get to the machine learning slide what engine is in all of these machine learning groups. This is the main representation we use unless I specify otherwise. And the thing that we find most interesting to come out of it is not necessarily that being able to predict a DFT result that was palpable, but also to analyze which features get selected when we carry out feature analysis. And so, for instance, here, this is something that we could figure out more easily. I'm just doing my data, but we can with machine learning, which is the graph on the left is showing you that which features are most important for predicting spin. You see a lot of gray in the pie chart. That means that a very non-local aspect of the transition complex is important for predicting spin. But because you see very little gray, that means that spin is most predicted by what's going on close to the metal. You see a lot of red and green; those are the features close to the metal. Then you notice that if you want to predict the redox complex, you see a lot. So that's a very non-local feature. And Hawkes information sits much closer to the spin chart for distant readings. And so that tells you going about the spin state of a transition metal complex is going to tell you how well or not. So much more than knowing about it. Redox where it's going. So the machine learning models tell us which heuristics will succeed and which heuristics will fail in a very nice way. So this is what we wanted to be able to build upon to actually accelerate discovery. So not just be able to predict our test setters to low MAE, but discover new complexes. And so here we came back to methane to methanol, and I already mentioned that really also had enough for me to incorporate other aspects of the cycle. And so what we wanted to do was we wanted to see something that's not a great scaling relation between alpha and half, but there's a little bit. So we're going to try to implement simultaneously for hydrogen ion transfer and for methanol. We're going to expand our pool, not just look at 500 things. We really want to make a dent and looking at new materials. And so we ended up doing a created a pool of 16 million candidate catalysts. We wrote down a series of rules for how we're going to combine different rates to form macrocycles. And so the ways that these macrocycles form a lot. It can lead to recreating things that are vulnerable in communities of sulfurs and corals. It also creates entirely new structures that have never been seen before. And so to do this, we're going to use something called efficient global optimization, which if you were in the first talk, you already saw some allusions to. And so we're going to write down our two objectives. One is going to be hydrogen transfer energy, the other is going to be release energy. We're going to go after some DFT data approach. We're going to train the girl left and say, what do you think of this target range of 16 million catalysts? The girl left can be smart about some points, dumb about others. But what we want to do is we want to move past the Pareto graph. We want to enrich the model past the Pareto graph. So we're going to score the space, thing known as the 2D expected improvement. And the 2D expected improvement score is high if the area of the point is greatly beyond the Pareto graph. And that can either rise when it's uncertain, that we don't really know anything about it yet, or because the point is promising. It's going to talk about it. And from this high scoring region, we're going to pick candidates. And then we're going to go back to TFT. We're going to reevaluate and we're going to retrain all of them. And our models in this case are going to be artificial neural networks. And that's a little bit different from most ego you typically see. And the reason we do that is because the ANNs have better header. And so the main ingredient we need now is we need an uncertain quantification metric. And so use practices the latent space or feature space distance. So we use the distance of our point to the latent space in the model. And if a point has high distance to our training data, then it's uncertain. Low distance is uncertain. So this was described in a 2019 paper, and we first applied LIGO for the optimization of redox flow batteries in this 2020 paper, and I can show you how we recently used it methanol. And so this is what we look at. We start out series of initial data. These and over several generations, what we're able to do is we're able to push down these energetics without losing attack. And in fact, a lot of these macrocycles ligands have a lot in common. What they have in common is an anionic acyl ligand, which destabilizes the binding of methanol, makes the electrostatic attraction of methanol in the center a lot less favorable without worsening steps. And we can go ahead and fully characterize the reaction coordinate, including the activation energy. And in turn, we can see competitive catalysts that should be better than. So for the last half of my talk, I'm going to switch gears and I'm going to talk about metal organics frameworks as catalysts. Because we knew we were sitting in a space where we have a lot of attractive aspects of metal ventures with organic bits grounded in transition. They're not really practical from a chemical engineering perspective. So we wanted to move to something that had the attractiveness of a transitional complex property houses perspective, but had the possibility of ultimately being more stable materials. And that may sound funny to people who've been working in moss for a long time, because moss are certainly not well known to be stable materials, but that's where we'll head to first. And so when we first got into organic frameworks, a lot of the machine learning that we were doing with the organic frameworks was focused on gas separations. And because gas separation is sort of so geometry dependent, it's really just a matter of how many molecules you put in the floor and how they can fit in there. A lot of developed machine learning models just incorporate information about geometry. And so we're interested in know, could we extend providing relations to mobs, and could we play the same games we played in the transition models? And here, chemist typically talks about the domain of the secondary building unit, the linker that connects those secondary building units to the functionals they're not used to thinking about this. And so what we did was we defined rack scopes that either focused on the secondary building unit, focused on the linker, or focused on the function. And adding those even to simple random forest models to update food flow. So we were provide the idea that using these features may be helpful. And so what we really wanted to do is not just make more predictive foods, but we wanted to get our plants to a feature importance analysis to ensure understand what method they take. And so if you're in the ultimate pressure regime, you can compare labs, which methane uptake, and you can see that for the most part, the amount of chemistry done in the red pie chart really is important. There's CO2 uptake in ultimate pressure, but it goes away. So if we go to high pressure, blue part, which is core geometry, really takes over for CO2 and methane, and metal chemistry is really dominating only the CO2 but more than so the theory and different mission, which is that CO2 is a more directional model between the methane, so therefore it should be important for but our conclusions really depend on where we get the data from. So if we get it from an experimental set of models, which is the hormone data set, around 10,000 models that have been experimentally crystallized, and we compare a model trained with CO2 in non-humans versus chemical data set, we see much more metals coming out when we train it on the experimental test. These are still simulated results, but whether they come from a set of experimentally characterized models or ones that have been hypothetically enumerated leads to vastly different conclusions. And this is troubling because this suggests that what are design rules I, my end will come with everything. So we're going to take a look. And what we're doing is we're doing dimensionality reduction to each of these different descriptor sets. And when you see great thinking through the experimental material, it has no login and set. And the main thing that should stand out straight away is that metal chemistry is the most severe mismatch between the hypothetical loss and the experimental stuff loss. So there's lots of experimental metal chemistries that have been used that have been seen that have never made it into this hypothetical tests. So we wanted to go back to the drawing board and we wanted to say, well, what is there here from this formula? Loss. What else can we figure out from what experimental somewhere to go? Because in the loss community, there are thousands of researchers, there's thousands of history. And at the very least, when we think about hypothetical materials, we should know as much as it's already known. And then we should be thinking about where beyond it. We shouldn't be missing things that are wrong. And this applies to many other areas of materials and composite, but it's the clearest here. So that's exactly what we did. We exploited the fact that thousands of models have been studied experimentally to go ahead and download every single week code for every associated. The reason that we did this specifically for core model is because there's a named entity recognition challenge associated with moves. So the same model can have names. And so in order to know I have this model and it has this property, we needed to be able to map structure and have the core model allows to do it. All the formulas we have in accountable structure. So what we did was we downloaded all these manuscripts and we thought about, okay, what types of properties are everyone reporting every time they want? And are these useful to us and probably? And the answer is yes, the properties are useful, but there's a limited number of properties easily get all. And the first is activation stability. If we sign them off, don't synthesize with typically solvents and pores, and the first thing we need to do is make it porous material by activating it. And then the other thing is that MOF stable at elevated temperatures? This is the key concern. Both of these are key concerns for whether or not we can use these MOFs as active catalysts. This is usually what people are talking about when they can something stable for catalysis, is you heat them off and it breaks down. So it turns out these are two things that are really frequently reported in the scale of a few thousand points, and so we can easily get models that would be able to predict thermal and the activation. And this was really exciting to me because these are two things I don't know how I would easily simulate. I don't know how to write down a simulation from a field that can easily get me to predict the activation stability of the MOF or the temperature of the MOF breakdown. I can easily come up with a protocol that would take us months or years of direct simulation, but this is something that an experimental field reported. And so this one became one that we directly learn in this. And so that's what we did. So we built a classification model for activation stability, and we could look at the design principles. And here, the main thing, the design principles point to the linker chemistry really important. And when we looked through the literature, most of the heuristic tools we found were more sensitive of what is methylene. Whereas our model really honed in on the linker extremely important. And the same thing goes with thermal stability. Thermal stability from the TGA is inherently noisy. We know that for its uncertainty of the measurement. Not only that, it's certainty of helping their TD. We sidestep that by digitizing commercials. And so we use the systematic information. But even then, you see the editing is just okay. Pretty okay. It's better than what we could ever make information. And again, linker chemistry really dominates the electronic properties of chemistry, like what this word indicates. And to be sure that we're actually doing this for the right reasons and not just looking at recent tested errors, we actually, even though there's some papers we can automatically download, still manually download. And when we did that over the manual set, our multiple generalize, it's just as well as it. So the goal it does is to come up with strategies, look at using these models to predict when MOFs will be more stable. For instance, here's a MOF that lacks activation stability. We can swap out things for calcium, so the MOF thing, but that doesn't improve the activation stability. Instead, our model really looks at the epoxy and so swapping that out covered the activation stability, the number goes like 3. And then the same thing goes with thermal stability. This is promote the thermal stability, and want to strengthen this MOF's thermal stability, which should strengthen the metal organic bond if you linker. And doing so raises the thermal stability without worsening the activations. So I'd just like to finish by bringing this full circle and saying, obviously, I've covered a lot of the highlights of my group so far, but where we'd really like to push this now is thinking about how we can actually use this to then make MOFs really reasonable catalysts. And so then catalysis program for the early complete around terms, most everything several technologies are not stable. And so now that we have models and predict and understand and report for us to what we're stable, we wanted to look at whether or not we start to use that guided technology to then screen for what would be fancy. So MOFs indeed are they have so they've been widely chemists where they've been shown single turnovers, but one of the key issues is the lack of stability needed for analysis. So And we're going to try to discover new materials yet. Hopefully finish with a story on how to discover new materials. But we're just trying to say, well, what is already known to be stable, or what is already stable. And so we go again back to 9,500 chocolate formats. 6,600 of them are either activation stable, predictive are modeled to be activation stable. And we focus here on single monomer. We don't want to worry about matricial catalysis. And 1,300 of those have monomer manuscripts. And my student Hussein is going to give a more detailed talk. But give silence here. And so what was really creative is what we wanted to do was for these 1,300 models, we wanted to find the ones that had never passed. Plenty of people have studied in one-off catalysts, or whatever it was, times, but we wanted to find the ones that and so what we did was we looked for keywords associated with catalysis in the mock manuscripts, and we picked out the ones that lacked more than two of those keywords. So there were definitely small in this data set that had been studied in the business, but we threw all those out. Like, okay, the one we still did and the ones that were paid. And then the second thing we wanted to do, so we got this down to the 110 but then we want to fully study the ones that now have their thermal stability. So we're going to call high thermal stability at composition temperature above 300 C. So that means we should be able to do catalysis with them at 200 C. That would be for thermal analysis. And then the other thing we did was we searched for open metal sites. So we wanted to find open metal sites that would make these good metal resistance. And a few other criteria got us down to about 100 candidate models that are expected to have thermal stability or new attack. If they have synthesis recipes, so they which they've been made, so they're great for researchers to think about next steps. And indeed, when we look at these around 100 models, we again find the same story that I put, which is that it's really easy to break scaling relations in these materials. Although people have reported scaling relations in MOS, it's really easy to disrupt the oxygen versus half scaling relation. These are all high-spin metals in manganese, chromium, iron, we can also do things like go beyond Emerson wall because we're not just looking at Emerson wall temperatures. But what's most promising here seems to be the manganese MOS. The manganese MOS have a low trade-off between stone and hat. They also sit in most thermodynamically favorable regions. And so we wanted to zoom in on this and make sure that release wasn't a heel killer for us for this methane to methanol conversion. And indeed, there's a number of ones, such as this here, with good hydrogen transfer, oxidation, and release. These are the three, and I'm just saying it's not detailed, all have interesting under-coordinate type sites that would be promising. And we can take a look at the full characterization of their catalytic cycles, and we get an energy span on the order 3 energy and energy span silicon wall, which is competitive with some experimental modes in this area. So I just like to finish by saying how I think I can still be useful beyond just recapitulating experimental results by pointing out some recent work we had come on in November this year, and that's addressing this question I raised of why are capillary materials showing the same results as this. And one of the things that we can do now that we can look at these machine learning longer predictive abilities, we can reevaluate data sets. So this includes HMOS, this includes more diverse data sets, tobacco, art, recent union of all hyperthermal data sets that's aiming at addressing these figures. And routinely what we see with graphs is little small, routinely what we see is that in comparison to the experimental stability of materials, hypothetical data sets are also not only less diverse and less stable. So they have lower stability than the experimental materials. And that maybe is not surprising because when we think about building hypothetical materials in the computer, it's, we're not thinking about, well, will this material be successful? So we're interested in going back to the drawing board with the stable formats and breaking down their building. Say, we can break down the building blocks of the most stable moss and then recombine them, and those new materials should have enriched effectively most of it. And so in doing so, we also created a new set of hypothetical materials that had a greater degree of diversity in the metal used and the low the current. And we sample a wide array of metals that would be of interest for and indeed, that's what we find. We're able to enrich the tail, so we're able to start to sample higher thermal stability, high application stability material in subsets of data set. But we can also simultaneously now screen for these materials. So just showing here, the green line is the experimentally temperature, and the gray is projecting histogram, and just showing you that the tails are rich now. So there's more data here where there's more high. And the three category periods are obviously if we combine one SPU with one linker, or we have multiple. And so now that we have these types of hypothetical materials, of course, there are consistent components that involve data. The synthesis is not as straightforward as in the case of nucleic acids. It's more straightforward than also design rules to simplify. So, for instance, here we're looking at the methane removals to be within the tank. And also enrich this maybe thermal stability and activation stability is not known. We also things about the mechanical result. And we can come up with design principles. For instance, here's a really interesting proliferating node, which gives rise to really high thermal and activation stability, but simultaneously good, which is useful for gas storage applications. There are natural things we haven't done yet. So one would be things like motor stability, acid stability, and also working or dealing in a more detailed way on more steps in catalytic mechanism when we're simultaneously screening these for catalytic, like either for the total operation or for other reactions. Or so it's not like when now people real our vulnerable to all the utilize the use great vulnerable yeah. You can send us comments on why data models are not predictive enough. You can also be able to look at where the data came from and where the point sits with respect to the distribution of other points in the model data set, and the new hypothetical materials we developed with the ultra stability are all available for download and provisionization. So I'd just like to finish by acknowledging the students who did the work. Most of the work I talked to you about today were transitional complexes and almost done by teacher Andy, who recently graduated and he started today, as I mentioned. I also had the chance to talk to you about Hussein Gauchi work, and he'll be giving his own talks from two people from my group still this week. So Hussein tomorrow, and I'm going to do Friday. Then I also had a chance to tell you about some work from Vaishnavi and Gianmarco, and just thank you all for your attention and take any questions.
Thanks, Paris. I think we have like 4 minutes for questions. So